The first snow of the season came down soft and indifferent over downtown Chicago, dusting the shoulders of strangers and melting the moment it touched the warm brick of Devon Street. It was the kind of snow that felt like a rehearsal, not yet the blizzard the forecast had promised, but enough to remind you that winter did not ask permission. Charlotte Whitmore stepped out of the black car service at 7:51 p.m., 9 minutes before her reservation, because she was never late. Not to board meetings, not to depositions, not to blind dates she had not wanted to accept in the first place. She was 34 years old. CEO of Whitmore Labs, a pharmaceutical research firm that had cleared $400 million in revenue last fiscal year. She wore a charcoal gray wool coat that cost more than most people's car payments, and her dark hair was pulled back with the kind of effortless precision that actually took 40 minutes. She had cheekbones that made photographers ask if they could do portrait work, and eyes that made opposing counsel decide to settle. She paused under the restaurant's brass awning and looked up at the sign. Asterisk, Fenwick's. Old Money Steakhouse. Dark wood, low lighting, the kind of place where men in their 60s celebrated decades-long careers by ordering the $48 porterhouse. Her best friend Dana had chosen it. Charlotte had accepted the venue without complaint, because arguing about the restaurant would have meant arguing about the date itself, and Dana had already extracted a commitment by showing up to Charlotte's office with coffee and a look that said, "Times, you are going to do this, or I will lose my mind." Asterisk. "He's good," Dana had said. "He's actually genuinely good." Charlotte had not asked what that meant. She had assumed she would find out and be unimpressed. She pushed through the heavy door. The hostess took her coat. Charlotte scanned the room in under 3 seconds force of habit. 14 tables occupied, a private dining room through the far arch, a mahogany bar to the left where 2 men in suits were arguing about something they found hilarious. Her eyes found the man Dana had described seated at table 7, and she understood the phrase, "times actually genuinely good" in a way that had nothing to do with her world. Ethan Cole was 38 years old, and he looked it. Not in the weathered, defeated sense, in the settled sense. He had the kind of face that had been outside in bad weather, the kind of hands that were resting on the white tablecloth and looked like they had done real work. His shoulders were broad. His shirt was a clean navy blue, no tie, no jacket, no attempt to perform a version of himself he was not. His dark brown hair was cut short and not styled. He was not unattractive. He was, Charlotte noted, with a flicker of something she refused to name as guilt, not what she had imagined when Dana said times, "good man, who deserves a shot." Asterisk. She had imagined an executive, maybe a doctor, someone who understood her world. This man had arrived early, was drinking water, and had placed his phone face down on the table. He stood when she approached, and he did not do it performatively. He did it the way men who were raised correctly stood when someone arrived at the table. He pulled the chair back for her. It was not theatrical. It was just done. "Charlotte," she said, offering her hand. "Ethan." His handshake was firm. His palm was rough. She sat. She picked up the menu. She ordered the Bordeaux without looking at the price. For the first 3 minutes, she said nothing she did not have to say. The sommelier poured. Charlotte turned the glass once before tasting, a habit so ingrained she no longer noticed she did it. Ethan watched with the mild interest of someone cataloging a behavior rather than judging it. "So," she said, "Dana tells me you're in construction. Restoration contracting," he said. "Historic buildings, mostly. We work with structures that were damaged, fire, flood, neglect. We bring them back. How long? 11 years on my own. Before that, I worked under a firm in the South Loop. We did a lot of the post-fire recovery on the warehouse district after the 2009 industrial fires. You might have read about that." She had not. She nodded as though she had. "And that's steady work? For a solo contractor?" Something shifted in his expression, but it was brief. "It's steady enough. good reputation in the industry. We're fully booked through spring. We. She noted the pronoun. A small crew, probably. Not a firm. Not a company with offices and a board and a profit and loss that someone else lost sleep over. She noted the water in front of him. Not a wine drinker, or not tonight, or not able to afford the wine list at this particular restaurant. She catalogued this without intending to and found she could not stop. Dana mentioned you have a daughter, Charlotte said, genuinely trying, to find the thread that connected them. And there it was, the shift that turned the lights on. Ethan Cole's face changed the way a room changes when someone opens a curtain. He did not smile in the wide, performative way people smiled when they wanted to be perceived as devoted parents. He smiled the way people smiled when they thought about something they loved without warning. "Lily," he said. "She's 8. What does she like? Drawing? Mostly. She fills up sketchbooks faster than I can buy them. Right now she's obsessed with architectural drawings. She comes to job sites sometimes and sketches the buildings we're working on. She wants to understand the bones of things." He paused. She also thinks she can ice skate better than she can, which has led to some memorable afternoons. Charlotte smiled. It was polite. It was the smile she used in meetings when a subordinate said something she found mildly charming and professionally irrelevant. She was aware that it was not a real smile. She was not sure she could produce a real one for this. "She sounds like a handful," Charlotte said. "The best kind," he said, and left it there. The bread arrived. Charlotte did not take any. Ethan took one piece, unhurriedly, and buttered it without apology. She watched him eat with the comfort of someone who was not performing restraint. Charlotte picked up her wine, set it down. "What does your week look like?" she asked. "Standard. Filling space. I've got a site assessment Tuesday in Hyde Park, a 3-story brownstone that went through a kitchen fire last spring. Thursday, Lily has a school thing, so I'm blocking out the afternoon. Friday, we're pulling permits for a job in Pilsen. You block out afternoons for school events? When I can, I try to make it work." She looked at him across the white tablecloth and the candle and the polished silverware, and she felt the first real thing she had felt since sitting down, not warmth, but something uncomfortable. She recognized it later, much later, as the low-grade friction of encountering a life organized around different priorities than her own. She took a long sip of wine. She began to talk about the Whitmore Labs expansion into the European market. Charlotte talked about the conference in Geneva she had attended in September, the regulatory landscape for European pharmaceutical approvals, the board negotiations that had taken 18 months and more than one red-eye flight. She talked about the profile piece that Times Forbes had run in October and the subsequent speaking invitations, and the way she had declined most of them because her time was worth more than her visibility. She was not unaware that she was doing this. She was doing it deliberately, not out of cruelty, she would tell herself later, but out of a kind of defensive positioning she had learned in her 20s when men in boardrooms made her feel small, and she had discovered that the most effective countermove was to make the room understand how large you were. Ethan listened. He did not look bored. He did not look intimidated. He looked attentive in the way someone looks when they are being polite and they know it. "What about you?" she asked, swinging back. "International work? Travel? I went to Toronto last year for a conference on historic preservation techniques. That's about the radius." "Toronto," she repeated, and she heard the tone in her own voice and made no effort to change it. "Charlotte," he said, setting down his glass of water, "I want to ask you something directly, if that's okay." She raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead. Do you actually want to be here?" The question landed flat and clear. No accusation in it. Genuine inquiry. "I said I'd come," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him for a moment. The table beside them had gone quiet. The couple, at table 6, a man in his 50s and a woman a decade younger, had both turned their attention to their plates, with the careful concentration of people trying not to eavesdrop. "I'm here," Charlotte said. "I'm giving this a fair chance. You've spent the last 15 minutes explaining your net worth to me. I was talking about my work. Your work is your net worth, which is fine. But I haven't asked you a single question about it, and I'm not sure you've noticed." Charlotte set down her wine glass, a small, precise movement. "What do you want me to say?" "Ethan, that I think we have a lot in common?" "I don't. I think Dana means well. I think you seem like a decent person, but I don't have time for someone who—" She stopped. "Who what?" She finished it. She heard herself finish it and registered the way the words sat in the air. "Who doesn't operate at my level?" The table beside them was completely still. Ethan did not flinch. He did not redden. He did not look at his hands or away at the wall. He looked directly at her, and his expression was not hurt. It was something quieter. "Clearer. That's an honest answer," he said. "I respect the honesty." He did not say anything else. Charlotte opened her mouth, closed it. The room had not gone loud again yet. It was the specific silence of a moment that a dozen people were quietly memorizing. She picked up her wine. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, a canvas work jacket she now noticed for what it was, and placed a folded 20 and a 10 on the table. "For the water," he said. "And for your time. You don't need to do that." "I know." He stood. The chair scraped back quietly. "It was nice to meet you, Charlotte." He was not cold when he said it. That was the part she did not expect. He was not performing dignity in the theatrical way, the straight back, the pointed exit, the pause at the door for effect. He simply meant it. He had come to have dinner with a stranger and discovered that the stranger was not interested, and he was leaving without punishing her for it, which was more than she could have said about most men she had rejected in more careful ways. She watched him button his jacket and nod once at the hostess. The door swung open. She caught a brief rectangle of Chicago winter, the street lamps already haloed in falling snow, the sidewalk darkening with it, and then the door swung closed. Charlotte sat alone at the table with her wine and her perfect posture and the quiet judgment of the couple at table 6, who were now speaking to each other in low voices. She should call for the check. She should text Dana a brief, honest text that said times not a match and closed the matter cleanly. She should get back in the car service and return to her apartment on the 43rd floor and open her laptop and finish the budget projection she had left at 70% because Dana had called and said, "Times just go, just this once. What's the worst that can happen?" Asterisk. She raised her hand for the waiter. And then the kitchen exploded. It was not dramatic in the Hollywood sense. It was not a fireball. It was a sharp crack from somewhere behind the service wall, followed immediately by the sound of something heavy and hot falling onto something it should not have touched, followed by a smell acrid and thick, the smell of electrical wiring and cooking oil and something structural burning together. The lights flickered. Then the smoke began to come under the kitchen door. Not the white vapor of a stove left on black and low and moving with the deliberate creep of something serious. Charlotte stood. Around her, others were standing. A woman at the bar said something loud and frightened. The sommelier dropped a bottle. The hostess was on the phone. 2 busboys pushed through the kitchen door and came back out immediately, hands up, coughing. A section of decorative ceiling beam near the far end of the bar cracked and dropped. Not fully, it hung at an angle, groaning, but the plaster around it gave way and came down in chunks onto 2 bar stools, which were empty, but only just. Someone screamed. Charlotte Whitmore, who had presented to rooms full of hostile investors without flinching, stood at table 7 with her handbag over one arm and her wine in the other hand, and understood, with a cold and total clarity, that she did not know what to do. She was not afraid of confrontation. She was not afraid of difficult information or hard decisions made at speed. But she had lived her entire adult life in environments that had fire suppression systems and emergency protocols and someone else responsible for the physical world. She had never been in a burning building. She had never had to think about oxygen and smoke and exits and load-bearing walls. and the specific calculus of when a structure becomes unsafe. The smoke was thickening. The lights flickered again and stabilized at half-power emergency lighting. She registered. Yellow and wrong-colored. A man near the entrance pushed toward the front door and was immediately joined by 4 others. The hostess was shouting. The bartender had come over the bar and was pointing toward the back. 2 people were pulling a third. A woman with a walking cane, away from her table. Charlotte took 1 step toward the front door and stopped. The smoke was lower than she expected. She did not know why that mattered. She knew, abstractly, that it mattered. She could not remember what you were supposed to do about it. She stood there in her charcoal gray dress and her heels and her ambition, and she was genuinely lost. Stay low. Move toward the wall. The voice cut through the noise, the way a command voice always does when it belongs to someone who has given commands in bad situations, before not loud exactly, but shaped right, shaped to carry and to be obeyed without requiring people to decide whether to obey it. He came through the front door. Ethan Cole had not gone far. He had been standing on the sidewalk under the overhang, buttoning his jacket against the wind and giving himself the 2 minutes of cold air he needed to decide what he thought about the evening when the smoke smell had hit him. He had not hesitated. He had not gone through a decision process. Something older and more practiced than decision processes had moved him back through the door. He had grabbed the long cotton tablecloth off the empty hostess table near the entrance as he came in. He went immediately to the bar station, where the soda gun was hanging on its hook, and he soaked the tablecloth in the sink behind the bar. He tore it into sections. He moved. "Cover your mouth," he said to the couple nearest him, pressing a wet section of fabric into the woman's hands. "Get low. Follow the wall to the right. Stay below the smoke line." Charlotte heard his voice before she saw him, and the recognition took a half-second times, "That's Ethan." And then he was beside her, crouching, his hand on her arm pulling her down. "Your heels," he said. "Take them off now." "What?" "Take them off. You'll fall in this smoke. Do it now." She reached down and unstrapped them. She was in her stocking feet on the restaurant floor, and there was black smoke above her head, and she followed him without further argument, which was not something Charlotte Whitmore did easily. He moved efficiently. There was nothing showy about it. He counted the people he passed, touched each one briefly on the shoulder to redirect them, kept his voice even and specific. Asterisk. This way. Stay low. Don't run. Walk. Keep your hand on the wall. The woman with the cane was managed by a man Ethan had identified and conscripted in under 5 seconds. Times, take her arm, stay with her, 2 steps behind me, and the man obeyed immediately. 14 people in the dining room. Ethan had counted on the way in. He moved them toward the service corridor along the restaurant's east wall, away from the kitchen, away from the dropped ceiling beam, away from the front door where the crowd was piling up and creating its own dangerous pressure. He kept Charlotte beside him. She was coughing. The smoke was thick enough now that the candles on the tables had been extinguished by the displacement of oxygen, and the emergency lighting made everyone's faces the color of old photographs. "There are people in the private dining room," Charlotte said, through the wet cloth he had pressed into her hand. "I saw them when I came in. 6, maybe 8 people." Ethan looked at her. It was a brief look, and it contained something she would think about later, a rapid recalibration. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He turned to a busboy behind him, a young man of maybe 20, who had been following with surprising calm. "You know this building? I've worked here 3 years. Private dining room, what's the second exit? There's a door to the alley on the north side. It's always locked. Okay. Take these people to the service exit at the end of this corridor. It opens outward. Don't stop. Don't wait for me." He looked at the busboy directly. "You understand?" He turned back into the smoke. Charlotte did not go with the group. She told herself it was because she knew the layout better, having scanned the room when she arrived. This was partially true. The fuller truth was that she was not yet ready to let him walk back into the smoke alone, and she did not examine this impulse closely. She followed him toward the private dining room. The corridor that connected the main dining area to the private room was service-width, built for waitstaff carrying plates. Ethan moved through it in a low crouch. The smoke here was heavier, fed by whatever was burning in the kitchen behind the wall. The temperature had climbed. Charlotte could feel the heat on her forearms. The private dining room door was a fire door heavier than a standard interior door, which was both good and bad. Good because it had slowed the spread. Bad because it had swung closed on its pneumatic hinge and the handle was hot. The 8 people inside were aware something was wrong but had not been given clear instruction. When Ethan opened the door, they were standing, some with their phones out, some clustered near the window that looked out onto the alley. "Service exit, north side," Ethan said. He crossed to the north wall in 4 steps and examined the door. Lever handle, commercial deadbolt, hinges visible on the interior face. He tried the lever. The deadbolt was locked. "Does anyone have a key?" A woman in a catering jacket staff, Charlotte registered. "Not a guest," said. "The manager keeps it." He went to the front. Ethan looked at the door. He looked at the hinges. He crouched and looked at the gap at the base, at the frame, at the way the door sat in its housing. He stood and set his left shoulder. "Stand back, away from the door," Charlotte said. "You can't break a fire door." "The hinge pins are exposed," he said. "The door swings outward, the frame is taking most of the load against the deadbolt, which means the weak point isn't the lock." He looked at her. "I've been doing this for 10 years. He struck the door twice, not at the lock side, at the hinge side, near the bottom hinge with a flat kick, heel down, and on the second impact, the lower hinge gave at the pin. He hit the upper hinge in the same way. The door bent inward at the lock side, the frame cracking, and then the whole thing tilted, and Ethan caught it and pulled it sideways. And there was the alley, raw and cold and smelling of snow and wet concrete, and the 8 people in the private room moved through the gap immediately. Charlotte was last. She stopped in the doorway. "How did you know that would work?" He had already turned away. He was scanning the alley, counting people. "Volunteer firefighter," he said. She stood in the doorway of the burning building in her stocking feet on the alley concrete in the first real snow of the season, and she felt the kind of small, clean shock that only genuine surprise produces. The man she had dismissed as beneath her level had just done in 2 minutes what the people she had left behind in the dining room could not have done in 20. She followed him into the alley. The first engine company arrived at 8:23 p.m. Charlotte sat on the back step of an ambulance with a foil blanket over her shoulders and a paramedic checking her oxygen saturation. Her dress was ruined. Her stocking feet were black from the alley concrete. She was holding a paper cup of something warm and not tasting it. Ethan was at the engine company's command vehicle with the incident commander, a heavy-set man named Paulson who clearly knew him, who had shaken his hand and then immediately pulled him toward the building's exterior for a structural assessment before the interior team went in. She watched him from across the chaos of the blocked street. He was pointing at the roofline, then at the southeast corner, then at the service entrance. He was drawing something in the air with his hands, the blueprint of a building he had been inside for less than 20 minutes. That he had mapped with the automatic attention of someone who thought in structure and load and egress. Incident Commander Paulson was nodding, calling into his radio. The interior team adjusted their entry point. The snow had thickened. It was coming down the way the forecast had promised, now serious, committed, blurring the neon of the street signs and collecting in the headlights of the fire engines. The city sounds were muffled and strange. The busboy who had led the group out through the service exit was sitting on the curb 30 feet away, his arm around an older woman who was crying with relief. He was saying something to her, and she was nodding. He looked up, met Charlotte's eyes briefly, and looked away. The woman with the cane had already been helped to a patrol car. She was talking to an officer through the window. All 14 people from the main dining room. 8 from the private room. 22 people in a building that had gone from normal to dangerous in under 8 minutes. No fatalities. Charlotte thought about the moment she had stood at table 7 with her handbag and her wine glass and understood that she did not know what to do. She had been completely alone in that moment in a way that had nothing to do with who else was present. She had all the credentials and all the authority and all the confidence that years of being the most competent person in every room had built, and she had stood there and been genuinely helpless. She had spent 15 minutes telling this man he was not at her level. The paramedic said her oxygen saturation was fine. She said thank you. Across the snowy street, Ethan was pointing at the cornice line. Paulson was nodding. The second engine company turned the corner and flooded the scene with additional light. Charlotte set down her paper cup. She stood up. The foil blanket slipped from her shoulders. She walked across the street in her stocking feet on the wet asphalt, and the cold was immediate and total, and she did not stop. He turned when he heard her footsteps. Paulson glanced at her and then at Ethan and stepped back with the tact of a man who had seen enough of human nature to read a moment. Charlotte stopped 2 feet from Ethan. She looked at him directly, without the armor of position, without the wine or the linen tablecloth or the performance of knowing what everything was worth. Her hair had come loose from its pin. There was a streak of something dark across her left forearm. She was standing in the snow in stocking feet. "I was wrong," she said. Ethan looked at her. He was tired. He was doing the particular controlled tired that people do when they have been running on adrenaline and it has just begun to leave them. He had a burn across the back of his right hand that the paramedics would treat in a few minutes. "You don't need to. I said things at that table that were unkind. Not wrong in the way that facts can be wrong unkind. I treated you like a category." She paused. She was not going to look away. "I'm sorry." He was quiet for a moment. In the background, the radios crackled. A news van had turned the corner. The snow came down steady. "Dana told me about you," he said. "She said you'd had a hard run. That you'd learned to protect yourself by deciding who was worth your time before they had a chance to prove it." Charlotte felt something move in her chest that she recognized as the precise discomfort of being accurately described. "She's not wrong," Charlotte said. "I know she's not." He shifted his weight. "My wife died 4 years ago. A warehouse fire. She was a property manager. She went in to check on a tenant, and the exit was blocked." He did not say it with drama. He said it the way people say hard things when they have said them often enough to carry them. "I was already volunteering with the 3rd District by then. After she died, I went in deeper, and I changed the work, started specializing in fire-damaged structures. So I could understand why they failed. So I could make them safer." Charlotte stood in the snow and looked at him. "The buildings you restore," she said slowly. "You're not just preserving them. I'm making sure they don't fail the way she did." He looked at the smoke still rising above Fenwick's roofline. Tonight was nothing. Electrical fire in the kitchen. Caught a grease trap. The structure was sound. Everybody got out. He paused. "They usually do, when someone knows what they're looking at." Charlotte was not a woman who cried in front of people. She was not going to cry in front of this man, in the snow, in her stocking feet, at the scene of a fire. She blinked twice. She breathed. "Lily," she said. "She comes to the job sites every chance she gets, and she sketches the buildings. She wants to understand the bones of things," he said. A slight smile. Her words. Charlotte nodded slowly. She thought about a girl of 8 with a sketchbook full of architectural drawings, tagging along to fire-damaged brownstones with her father, watching him measure and assess and understand, learning without being taught that the world was made of structure you could either read or be lost in. She thought about herself at 8 years old in her father's boardroom, listening to acquisition strategy, learning that the world was made of leverage you either held or were held by. 2 children learning the same lesson in completely different buildings. "She sounds extraordinary," Charlotte said, and she meant it without reservation. The snow was falling in full earnest now. the kind of snow that made Chicago feel ancient and particular, that smoothed the hard edges of the city and turned the streetlights into diffuse, glowing columns. The fire was contained, Paulson had said so, formally, at 9:04 p.m. 2 of his crew were doing overhaul. The news van had its shot and was packing up. The paramedics had treated Ethan's hand, second-degree burn, not serious, wrapped in clean gauze. He had submitted to this with the mild impatience of someone who knew the protocol and was not interested in the fuss, but understood that fuss was sometimes required. Charlotte had retrieved her shoes from where she had left them in the chaos of the evacuation. They were ruined. She was carrying them. Her stocking feet had long since stopped registering the cold. They were standing on the sidewalk, not quite ready to separate, not quite sure what the next words were. "I owe you dinner," Charlotte said. "You don't owe me anything. I'd like to buy you dinner. Different restaurant, different night. Without the judgment." He looked at her. "Without the judgment is a high bar for you." She laughed. She did not produce this laugh deliberately. It came out of somewhere genuine and surprised her with its existence. "That's fair," she said. "An honest attempt, then. Lower bar, more achievable." Ethan considered this. He was not performing consideration, he was actually thinking about it, which she found unexpectedly disarming. "Lily has a thing on Saturday," he said. "Her class is doing a winter art show. She's got 3 drawings in it." He paused. "Dana knows where the school is, if you wanted to come. It's not dinner. It's a gymnasium full of 8-year-olds and fruit punch." Charlotte Whitmore, who attended gallery openings and wine dinners and charity galas that required black tie dress, stood on a snow-covered Chicago sidewalk, holding her ruined heels, and considered this invitation. "What kind of drawings?" she asked. "Buildings," he said. "Fire-damaged ones she's helped me assess. She titles them by address." Charlotte thought about a girl who titled her drawings by address, who sketched the bones of buildings that had survived being broken, who was being raised by a man who came back through burning doors without being asked. "I'll be there," she said. Ethan nodded. He pulled out his phone, an ordinary phone, not the latest model, the screen with a small crack in the upper right corner, and held it out. She added her contact. "Charlotte," he said, reading it back. "Ethan?" She said. It was not a romantic moment in the conventional sense. There was no music, and the lighting was emergency LED, and the smell of smoke still hung in the air, and her dress was ruined, and he had a burned hand, and they were 2 people who had just survived something together after one of them had been profoundly unkind to the other. But it was honest, and she had not managed honest in a long time. She watched him cross the street toward his truck, a work truck, she noticed now, with the name of his firm in small letters on the driver's door. *Coal Restoration. Simple. Earned. She flagged the car service. While she waited, she looked back at Fenwick's. The fire was out, but the smoke marks above the kitchen windows were dark against the creamstone facade, and the interior was clearly gutted. A building that had failed structurally minor, historically significant. The kind of thing that a good contractor could assess in a day and rebuild in a season if the right person understood its bones. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to Dana. *, you were right. He's good. Actually, genuinely good. *, 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then, *, I know. Also, are you okay? I saw something on the news about a fire at Fenwick's *, I'm fine. Ethan got everyone out. *, a longer pause. Then, of course he did. *, Charlotte smiled at her phone in the snow. The car arrived. She got in. The leather seats were warm, and the driver asked if she was okay, looking at the smoke marks on her coat. And she said yes, she was fine. Thank you. And meant it in a way she had not meant that phrase in a while. The city moved past the windows. The snow was thick enough now to stick to the glass, each flake distinct for a half second before joining the accumulation. Chicago in first snow looked like itself unglamorous, enduring, made of things built to last longer than any single person's ambitions. Somewhere on the north side, a girl named Lily was in a house that smelled like wood shavings and pencil graphite, with a sketchbook on her lap and the television on, waiting for her father to come home from a date she knew nothing about. In the city, he knew how to read. In the morning, she would show him the newest drawing of brownstone on Ashland Avenue, fire damaged on the third floor, the remaining windows like open eyes, the structure intact beneath the damage. She would title it by address. He would sit beside her and look at it the way he looked at all her work, with the full and unhurried attention of a man who understood that some things deserved your best and most complete presence. And somewhere in the 43rd floor of a glass tower that she had chosen for its views rather than its bones, Charlotte Whitmore would lie awake longer than usual, thinking not about the board meeting on Monday, or the European filing deadline, or the Times Forbes piece that her PR director wanted her to approve. She would think about a door that had bent inward at the hinge, and the exact sound it made when a person who understood structures met a structure that had failed and took it apart from the right place. She would think about what it meant to know the bones of things. She would think about Saturday, and a gymnasium, and fruit punch, and a girl who titled her drawings by address. And she would think for the first time in longer than she could easily remember that she had not wasted her evening. She had spent it getting the first honest look at a life different from hers, and found it larger than she expected, and found herself standing in the snow in stocking feet with ruined shoes and smoke on her coat, wanting to know more of it, not because she needed anything from it, but because she had just been reminded in the most direct way available that the world was full of people who knew things she did not, who had built themselves in ways she had never considered, who moved through the exact same city she lived in and saw a completely different set of things when they looked at it. And some of those people, the ones who had earned their hands and their knowledge and their unhurried sense of what mattered, were worth more than she had been willing to see. The car stopped at her building. The doorman held the door. Charlotte Whitmore stepped out of the